Hi everyone. So we're going to switch it up a little bit this week. What I'm going to do here is demo a tool that is mentioned in the syllabus called OpenRefine, and just cover kind of some basics of some places that you might look to find data, to some of the functionality that OpenRefine provides, which is, I really like it in particular for doing quick summaries, quick statistical summaries, or quick numerical summaries is probably more appropriate, which is something you can definitely do in Excel, but it's, I think, a little less straightforward. I also really like OpenRefine because OpenRefine can handle much larger data sets than Excel can handle, and a wider variety of formats, broadly speaking. So we're going to look at that, and to do that, and then in class we're actually going to talk about some stories, some actually like bringing data into video, doing kind of video explainers, and we'll look at some examples and kind of go through how they were conceived and constructed, how the work in them relates to some of the data analysis that we've been doing. So the first thing that I'm going to do is obviously look for, I need some data. There's actually one of the places that you can look for this is the New York City Open Data Portal. Now, obviously, this is only going to apply if you're actually looking for data about New York City, but it's a pretty decent place to start. Again, it really is just one source, and I strongly recommend always that, if you're working with experts on a story, that you ask them about what relevant data is that can kind of shed light on the question that you're addressing. However, I'm going to go here and just kind of go into the data catalog, and they've done some nice categorization here. You'll see that there are two options for the quote-unquote level of authority. So there's official data, and then there's community contributed data. And then they have a bunch of categories, but you can also do a keyword search. So I'm going to choose official data here. I want to work with data that's been collected and sort of vetted by the city. And then I'm just going to put in immigration here, because I know that that's a topic that some of you were looking at. And actually, I think this first data set is kind of a nice option. So this is looking at the kinds of after-school programs that the department, I believe it's the Department of Youth and Community Development, offers around the city. This isn't a huge data set, so it's not for the size that we would use a tool like OpenRefine. It's more because this contains not just numbers, but sort of different types of data. And again, OpenRefine is really handy for kind of looking at structured data that has text in it, and again, doing kind of summaries and giving us a quick overview of the data. So the first thing I want to point out here is there's a little bit of what we call metadata about this. So metadata is, of course, what describes the data that's in the columns. So even this description here would be considered metadata because it gives us information like what DYCD is, which is the Department of Youth and Community Development, right? So having just the structured data itself is really never enough. We have to understand, of course, what the data really genuinely describes. So I want to point out a couple of things. One is that there's an API option here, and I just point this out because this is where you can see that all of the things that we can actually get in JSON. Now, we're not going to use JSON in this case because that's not the type of analysis that we're doing, but I'll just demonstrate that we have this. So hopefully this looks not wildly unfamiliar at this point. You can see that there is this traditional structure that we saw with our own JSON. I'll go ahead and copy out, I think this is a couple of options here. And I can actually bring it right over to JSON lint, right? And just demonstrate for myself that this is, in fact, JSON. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I can get this to kind of check the JSON. It's having an issue because I didn't keep the square brackets there. Really should have the square brackets. I didn't want to do the entire thing, so I avoided that. But in any case, whether or not, even with that little error, you can see it formats it, right? And you can start to get a sense for what's in here. Now, generally speaking, this isn't probably how I would look at it, and I will point out, in fact, that I think this is a more limited. This might be more limited than what's actually in the CSV file. So if you remember the beginning of this segment, we talked about different file types. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and export this. And I'm going to choose CSV. I could choose, so that's comma separated file. CSV for Excel usually means it's an Excel file, an XLSS, S file or SLSX file. That's a tongue twister. But I'm going to go with CSV. I like CSVs. They're clean. I know what to expect. And it just makes it really easy for me to find. So what I am going to do here now is switch over to OpenRefine. And this is what OpenRefine looks like. OpenRefine is a software program, but one of the reasons why it's able to handle more data than something like Excel is that the interface to it is in your browser. Okay, so this is actually open in a Chrome window. It'll open automatically at this location. You can actually bookmark this location and come back to it. And as long as you have started the OpenRefine program, you'll recognize it on the school computers because it'll have a little diamond. The icon is a diamond, and it's free. It's open source. You can install it on your own computers. And just double click it and get it up and running. If any of you want to install it, I'm happy to go over that with you in office hours. But OpenRefine, it operates in the browser. This does not mean that it's on the internet, okay? So all of the data is staying on your computer, it's staying local, but this just means that the program has a little less overhead to spend on having a big interface, right? It's a little bit lighter weight. This also means, however, that there are no keyboard shortcuts in OpenRefine. So we do everything basically through point and click. So it's going to be a slightly different experience than working with Excel if you're used to Excel, but it does a lot of really valuable things. So the first thing that you notice is that I don't have any projects yet. So I'm going to choose Create Project, and I'm going to choose a file to open. Again, they describe it as uploading it, but again, we're not really uploading it exactly. It's staying on our computer. So I'm going to just choose a file, and in this case, got this one, okay? And now it's going to take you through this interface that's going to kind of show you what it thinks the data should look like. So this is a nice little preview area, and you can see if you look at the bottom here that actually it will accept all kinds of files. So I actually could look at JSON files with this. I could look at XML files, open document format spreadsheets, so if you're using LibreOffice or something like that. Line-based and fixed width text files, these are files that these are the kinds of files that you might get out of databases from like really old government databases. For the most part, they're going to be, as this describes, separator-based files. And it makes a smart judgment. It recognizes that this is a CSV. One of the things I like about this is that it treats the first line, if this box is checked, again, it will generally detect it appropriately. But it'll treat the first line as a column header, and so we don't get that problem that we have in Excel where the headers are kind of like in our data in a weird way. Basically, if all of this looks good, I can just click Create Project. So one of the things that I love about OpenRefine is perhaps one of the simplest things, which is that unlike opening something in Excel, I immediately find out how many rows there are. Because it always shows it right at the top. There are 78 rows. So if I look at this again and I think about what this data is and where it came from, there are, in New York City, according to the official data, there are 78 programs run by the Department of Youth and Community Development that offer immigrant services, right? Right off the top, that's actually a useful piece of information, right? I've done very little work, almost none at all. I've literally just opened the file locally, but already I have some information that's useful to me. It tells me something about the scope of it. Obviously, with something that only has 100 files, not such a big, only has fewer than 100 lines, maybe that's not such a big deal. But when you start dealing with larger data sets, it's really good to know. The main way that we're going to interact with OpenRefine here is through something called faceting. And so faceting is kind of like a filter, but basically what it does is it groups like entries and tells you how many of them there are. And so you can apply facets. There are both numeric and text facets, but text facets are kind of the most useful. So that you know how many times something appears. So again, a lot of this is stuff that in theory that we could do with Excel. We could do it with kind of advanced Excel work. If you're somebody who's comfortable with pivot tables, this functionality will feel familiar. If you're like me and you're not comfortable with pivot tables in Excel, I find this a much more straightforward way to look at data. So all I have to do is choose this option here, and you'll see that there are a couple of things. So the main one here is text facet. I don't have to do anything besides choose text facet. And what it's going to show me on the left-hand side here in this little panel is exactly what I mentioned, and it's saying 2 choices. So basically, if you look at all of the cells here, it has one of 2 values. It's either immigration services and immigration support services, or immigration services, immigration support services, and NDA programs. And you can see in the little gray text just to the right of that, the number of times it appears. So 68 of our rows have the first descriptor, 10 of them have the second descriptor. So again, right off the bat, I have some summary information, right? If you're looking at NDA programs, there's only 10 of them. This by default will generally sort by name. I can also sort by count. In this case, that doesn't change anything. But now I can start to drill down and look at what we sometimes describe as cross tabulations. So for example, I can do things like I can just, again, text facet on program and sort by count, see which is the most commonly offered type of program, and immediately I see that it's a legal assistance program followed quickly by domestic violence programs. Now, if I wanted to find out something about just, say, domestic violence programs that are offered, all I need to do is click this. Okay, you see it's highlighted in orange, and what that means is, and you notice that this total updates up top here. So it's showing you that in your current selection, which is domestic violence programs, there are 17 matching rows out of 78 total rows. So now I can use this to just browse through this data. You notice that it doesn't show a lot of data at once. I have a maximum of 50 rows, and that's because, again, the way that you interact with OpenRefine is different than the way that you interact with Excel, right? This is not a case where we're going to have to go through and literally look at the data in the same way. These faceting options are really what give OpenRefine power for giving us that overview capacity without having to visually go through and inspect things ourselves, which is very difficult and very time consuming, very tiring. So if I look at domestic violence programs, maybe I want to know how many different organizations are offering domestic violence services through this program. So I'm going to come over to agency and text facet on that. And I want to point out now that the results that I'm seeing are only the agencies involved in the domestic violence that offer the domestic violence program, right? So I'm actually looking at a subset right now of my data. And I can see that the New York Legal Assistance Group, I'm actually make sure I sort by count, offers 11, something called Safe Space offers 3, the Legal Aid Society 2, Sanctuary for Families 1. I can keep going and going on this, right? So I can then go down to age and grade level. I'm sort of running out of space here on the screen. I don't need this one because I didn't make a selection within it, right? But I can say, okay, which ones offer things for all ages? If I select that, now I can see which ones offer all age programs. You can see that there's quite a lot of data here actually. So there's information about the borough and county that things are offered. I think just as a sort of general thing, it's interesting to see how many agencies there are. So if I want to cancel a selection, all I have to do is close out that box. Or of course, if I've chosen something, I can also just click it again and it will become unselected. If I want to click more than one thing, I can click one. And then if I come to include here, that's how I can choose 2. Basically, anything that's in orange is going to be literally refining the view of the data that I have at that moment. So again, one thing that I think is interesting is how many different agencies are offering these services. There's 32 of them, so it's not totally unique. And then I can go ahead and say, okay, well, if I look at this one, how many different, what different locations are they in, right? So again, I can text facet here, and I can see they have 1 Brooklyn, 1 Jackson Heights, which of course is Queens, and 2 general Queens locations and 2 Staten Island locations. So this is just a really nice way to kind of get some great overview data. Things like community board district, council district, census tract. So there's some really interesting information in here that can let us start to key together different sets of data to help understand what's going on, right? So I can say something about, for example, I can look for data about that community board district where they're operating, or the council district, or the census tract, right? I could actually look up data in the U.S. Census about the people who live in this census tract, or in the postal code, and start to learn more about the demographics of that area, and bring that and use that to help generate insight about perhaps the work that this program is doing, the community that it's serving, things like that, right? So this gives us a way to get another type of information about a situation that Otherwise, of course, we'll do interviews, we'll talk to experts, right? But this can give us some of those quote unquote hard numbers in certain cases that help us quantify and sort of attach some scope to those expert interviews. So that's it for OpenRefine. Again, I just wanted to kind of introduce this. I'm happy to answer questions in class. You will find this on the computers in the lab, so feel free to play with it. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So again, in class, we're going to be going over some examples of different kind of explainer videos and how the process of kind of forming the questions for those videos and integrating data into them. And I look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday.